And there's also a business support center to support local businesses for them to upgrade to be able to provide services in the sector. With Brazil, I'm going to focus on the funding program. It's called Progredio. This one is Petrobras, in collaboration with the 6 largest banks in Brazil. They have been able to raise funds to support local suppliers and service providers. And they have a structure in how to do it, from supplier registration all the way to bank release of the fund. So it's something that has been quite successful and worth learning from this Progredio structure. And they also have SME capacity building programs funded through various means. Next, please. And what I'm drawing from this presentation, what I'm recommending from, of course, from Tanzania and East African partner states, because we all are all local content, looking at Uganda and Kenya, we're speaking of local content, in terms of national content, but again, having local supplier development fund to support local content initiatives is very, very key. And local capacity development is always costly. So you need a reliable and sustainable source of fund to support. In Tanzania, we've had a number of initiatives, but again, having that reliable fund, it's something that we are championing right now, and hopefully in the next few years we're going to have something like that. And again, apart from establishing fund under the law, there's also secure fund from development partners. Like what we've seen in Angola, they had fund from AFDB, World Bank, specifically for local supplier development. So I think those are the 2 major recommendations and takeaways out of this discussion. And what I always say, local content is very costly. We need to put our money where our mouth is. We need to be able to not only talk, but again, walking the talk is the most critical part when it comes to local content development. Thank you so much.
Let's give him a better applause. Thank you very, very much, Ebenezer. And based on studies, not just from his own mind, he recommends that there should be supplier development funds to be used solely for the development of suppliers. I think we had downstairs, again, there has been significant problems in financing, and that companies could get some good lucrative contracts, and then they are struggling to finance them. And also sometimes even funds for capacity building may be a problem. I think that leads us straight to what Betty Jackie Namubilu is to speak to us about. And she's going to be here to speak about the role of capacity building in promoting national participation in the oil and gas sector in Uganda. And so welcome, Betty. Let's welcome her with an applause. Betty will give you some 10 minutes in total, but please start by introducing yourselves. I would suggest you take the shortest time in the introduction.
Thank you very much. My name is Betty Namubilu. I work as a manager national content monitoring at the Petroleum Authority of Uganda. This morning, I'll speak to you about the role of capacity building in the oil and gas sector. In Uganda, we've taken capacity building so seriously, and all the achievements that we are seeing in terms of participation, we attribute to the different efforts in capacity building, and this presentation is going to showcase some of these aspects. I don't know if you want to control this. Okay. Introduction, the efforts that have been done, what impacts, and conclusion. Next slide. By way of introduction, just to emphasize, national participation cannot be achieved without deliberate efforts to build capacity. We are relatively new in the oil and gas space, so we needed to invest a lot, and we continue to to invest a lot in capacity building so that we can be able to achieve the efficient participation that we want in the oil and gas sector. And as a country, we have defined 5 major facets that we look at as we promote participation, one of them being employment. How do we get our people to work in this sector in terms of getting jobs? Capacity building, again, building their capacity to become more competitive, to work together with the foreigners or the expatriates that have that global experience. Enterprise development, again, we want to see our companies participate so that we can retain optimal value in the country. So we look at a number of capacity enterprise development mechanisms. Then, of course, how much of our goods and services, both available and within that are within the country, that can be used to ensure that at least part of the money that comes in the country is retained. Next slide. So capacity building, in this case, we focus on 2 main aspects. The human capacity development of people, where we look at how we upgrade our training institutions and accredit them to international required standards so that they can produce graduates that are industry ready, but also training, actual training and certification of our people. We also again look at upskilling the engineers that have trained through Makerere University. They are going for oil and gas related master's trainings in petroleum so that they can be able to supply the industry, but also the technicians. We are picking on the ordinary welders that weld doors and windows, and we take them to get the 6G, 5G welding offered by City and Guilds, American Welding Society, and those. So that is the focus on human capacity building, ranging from the institutions, but also the individuals. On enterprise development, we look at majorly supporting our enterprises to grow their competitiveness so that they can be able to supply. We want to see Ugandan companies here, homegrown, being able to compete with the Schlumbergers of this world, with the Baker Hills. So that is the focus there. So this is to give you a summary of the areas that we look at in terms of capacity building. So on the next slide, we look at what the efforts have been in the different aspects. For example, in human skills development, we've had deliberate training of government officials so that we can be able to engage with the industry. These people come with experience of 15, 20 years being in this aspect. So there is that effort that has been put into training so that the discussions in the boardrooms can be balanced. And this started as far back as 1980 for the government officials, but also sponsorships of government, of Ugandans in general to be able to get employed in the sector. Another aspect is establishment of the Oil and Gas Technical Institute. We did a number of studies, and it's now globally known that majority of the people, actually, when you look at our industry, 70% of the people that will require will be technicians. So having known that, they established a Petroleum Institute in Chigumba, but gradually we are also seeing different private players establishing. As you can see, the Assessment and Skilling Center, Solid Rock Life and Business, Busoga International Polytechnic. These have also come on board to ensure that they complement the efforts of government. Establishment of oil and gas training, again at professional level. Number 2 is looking at technical, vocational training, but number 3 is looking at the professional trainings. A number of programs established in one of our biggest university, Makerere University, but also where we stand today, we have close to 10 universities being able to offer oil and gas training at even certified level. Attachments to mature industry affiliates, we have had our people exposed. The industry here is moving from one petroleum value chain to another. We are yet to go into development and production. So the approach is the companies that are working here, we request them to take these people and expose them where they have mature facilities that are working. So that has also helped us a lot, as you'll see in the demonstration of the outcomes. Again, for us to be able to understand where we are in terms of the skills vis-a-vis what the industry requires, we undertook a workforce skills development strategy and plan, which we developed in 2016. We are now looking at updating it to take care of the skills that are required in the next phase, in the current phase of development. So this has also helped shape. So these are the avenues that we have been working on. I'll later speak about what we've seen as a result of these efforts. Next slide on the enterprise development, still under human skills development. The efforts again, those are the different training institutions that we've had. I can say that close to 12,000 Ugandans have been trained and certified in various oil and gas disciplines. We have international certifying bodies, American Welding Society, OPITO, ECITB. They have all come and domiciled in the country as a result of oil and gas. And about 250 government officials from different ministries and agencies have been trained, like I said, so they can be able, not only in petroleum-related fields, but also fields like economics, like revenue management, like legal, so that they can be able to describe legal frameworks, but also manage our revenue aspects. Next slide, please move fast. I have very limited time. Enterprise development, again, as another facet under capacity building. We have the National Supplier Database that is supposed to project the visibility of our local companies. This was also established to ensure that they are known when the investors come here. They know there is a database where I can quickly pick a company. But also over the years, it has become a very useful tool in supporting joint ventures, building joint ventures. Our logistics firms visit and they look at who is playing in the logistics space globally, and they form joint ventures. Through collaboration, we've had a training of about 1,700 SMEs from private sector, looking at bid management. How do you put up a competitive bid in the oil and gas sector? We've had a massive communication campaign. We actually have a communication strategy for the oil and gas sector where we continuously engage the suppliers. We have annual conferences organized by PAU, by Ministry of Energy, Chamber of Mines, Private Sector Foundation, and through this, from our records, we have been able to reach about 7,000 enterprises to be able to understand the demand of the industry so they can prepare adequately. We are implementing a $500,000 US project that is funded by the African Development Bank, again to support enterprise development, linkages, being able to understand the requirements of the industry, and this is going across the 10 districts that the East African crude oil pipeline takes the route. So those are picked from those 10 districts. Again, we have the incubator, the Stanbic Business Incubator. They've been our good friends. They are a good example of local content. They take these companies through what have you been able to, you've not been able to make it through the procurement processes. What are the gaps? What can we do? So that has been really helpful. Now, going to the impact of capacity building. Having said that, as mechanisms that have been put in place, what do we have to show? And we normally do this in terms of numbers. We believe that capacity building has led to many things, but for today we will talk about 3. Increased employment of Ugandans in the oil and gas sector will demonstrate the value retention through procurement and utilization of Ugandan goods and services gradually increasing. There's been a lot of knowledge and technology transfer through creation of joint ventures. So I'll begin with increased employment of Ugandans, just to give a quick highlight of where we are. Please move to the next slide. So in terms of employment, where we are today, and over the years, the numbers have grown, but also the quality, because back then in 2006, 2007, when we had just made the first discovery, majority of our people were doing basic jobs like being, office attendants, being drivers, working on all those small little things, the very basic positions within the companies. But over time, we are seeing this grow. Today, we have a total of 71,330 Ugandans employed in the sector. And the pie chart on the other side demonstrates out of those 10% are employed directly by the companies. That's about 7,205 people. We have the indirect employment that come as a result of the services that the oil and gas sector does. That contributes 23%, and of course the biggest is 67% in induced, where the economy becomes more vibrant, like in the oil and gas graben. We see the oil and gas areas in the Albertine graben. We see the banks coming in, you know, all these other services coming as a result, what we normally term as the linkages. So that is the picture. Like I said, there is now improved quality in employment. At least we have, out of the management in the direct, those that are employed directly in the management category, at least 26% are Ugandans at managerial level. 65% of those doing technical supervisory work are Ugandans, and of course at the lower level we have now hit 100%. We have expatriates that work in the industry. As you know, we can't do everything by ourselves. So over the years, through capacity building and all these talks, we've had 35 positions that were formerly occupied by expatriates. They are now occupied by Ugandans, and some of them are as high as, you know, managers in these companies. 20 Ugandans are on expatriation. They have learned, they have been able to do the work effectively. So Total, CNOC, they have agreed that they take them and work in their other affiliates as workers this time round, and not only trainees. At community level, we again mind so much about the impact at the community level, and we track this. More than 3,000 Ugandans are employed at community level within the different projects. And this number is growing, because where we are today, there is a lot of activity. I don't know, maybe some of you are going for the excursions, you'll be able to see. These activities are growing, and the emphasis on community employment, but also utilization of goods is happening. Promotion of employment in the sector, we have the National Oil and Gas Talent Register, same as the one we have for the suppliers. NSD for suppliers, National Oil and Gas Talent Register for registering our people. To date, we have close to 8,000 Ugandans that are registered there, so the employers can be able to source and, you know, pick out the talent that they want. Next slide. In terms of value retention, during exploration, this company received up to $3.5 billion to be able to explore, you know, to appraise, to confirm, and out of that $900 million representing 25% was retained in the country as value. For the period 2017 to 2022, we have seen a number of procurements, about 3,800 procurements. Out of those, about 3,340 procurements went to Ugandan companies, but also in terms of the value itself, what has been spent over this period is $4.4 billion, and out of that, at least 1.7, representing 40%, has been retained in the country. And some of the companies that have been able to do the work have been listed here. We only have their logos here. This is only an example, working in hotel industry, provision of medical, legal services, you know, geotechnical services, and all that. So overall, the value retention through procurements only, not looking at employment, not capacity building, is about 26%, which is 1.17. And the value at community level, like I said, at least we've been able to engage up to 41 community-based companies, and the value attached to this is about 2.3 billion. So we are trying to track to see these investments are coming in the country, but how can we ensure that we retain these? Another aspect, which is also the last, that is knowledge and technology transfer through creation of joint ventures. This is only a demonstration. Where we started from, you could not have a Ugandan company go into a joint venture with any foreign firm because they are experienced. I mean, they didn't have, our companies didn't have the skills, but over time, through the different efforts, at least we've been able to see these JVs working in geophysical surveys, you know, social and resettlement services. It sounds basic, but there are other international requirements like IFC, welding training, because the training institutions we have here weld basically, but we have been able to bring in these engineering, procurement, and construction. Some of our engineering firms have come on board to support. Also in terms of construction of the acceptable prefab camps. So we've seen a lot of interventions in this area. So that is simply a snapshot of what we are doing, how capacity building has supported us as a country. You can see the value in terms of numbers is really high. So would like to emphasize that capacity building is a key enabler for sustainable participation in oil and gas activities, and we need to embrace this as a region. It's evident that the investment in this aspect can enhance participation in ways that can significantly contribute to economic development. You can imagine if we can be able to retain 1.7 million US dollars in a space of 3 years. I know that this is development and the services are really high, so that means there is a huge potential in this industry. As a country, Uganda, we are committed to continued capacity building as we aspire to retain at least 40%. Today, we are looking at spending between 15 to 20 billion US dollars in the development phase, and our aspiration is to retain at least 40% through employment, through use of Ugandan goods and services, technology transfer, capacity building, and those aspects. Thank you very much for listening.
Please give Betty a better applause. It's hard to stop Betty when she's showing the numbers, what we are achieving. I think this is what the whole of this morning is about. This is what we are trying to achieve. We want to see where have we come from and where are we going. Is it increasing? Is it working and all that? Betty is a true professional in this local content subject. I think I've interacted with her on it since 2006 when Uganda discovered oil until now, and she's still building on it. And you can see what is being developed. So thank you very much. And thank you very much, all of you, for applauding her. The last presentation in this session will be from John Kariuki Jogu. He's looking at development of local content in oil and gas industry. I would also want to remind you, if you have a question that may have come in mind, please jot it down somewhere. We'll have a short question and answer session to these 3 presenters. But for now, let us welcome Mr. Kariuki Jogu to make his presentation.
Good afternoon. I'm John Kariuki Njogu. I work as a civil engineer in the Ministry of Petroleum and Mining, and also, as a civil engineer and a senior petroleum officer in the Ministry of Energy and Petroleum, State Department for Petroleum. So today I'll be taking you through my presentation that is on local content development in Kenya upstream oil and gas industry. As we all know, recently the East Africa countries have discovered oil and gas fields, and this has sparked much speculation and discussion that some of these East Africa countries will become the key players in the oil and gas industry in the near futures. And then so they have it has prompted the need for development of local content, more so in Kenya, with a major goal being in promotion on country value addition through four main pillars. That is local employment, in terms of employment, in country spending and procurement of local goods and services, technology and skill transfers, and local participation through equity and management. My objectives were around four of them. I investigated the meaning and significance of local content to the community, especially in the area of oil and gas exploration. Secondly, I identified some of the factors that contributed to the development of local content in Kenya oil and gas petroleum sector. And thirdly, if the current legislative framework in Kenya, whether they're sufficient enough to ensure there's value addition to the communities. And then I evaluated some of the best approaches used by the other jurisdiction to ensure local communities receive the value addition. I focused more on the East Africa countries, that's Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania, but I dwell more on Kenya. Now, my methodology, I adapted the 4 of them. The literature review, which I did a comprehensive review of the secondary source of information through a meta-analysis, which served as my foundation. Then secondly, I carried out a data analysis of the same from the past research. Thirdly, I did a comparison of the same, while I concentrated more so on some of the papers that were highlighting the current legal framework for the Kenya local content. Then I did a systematic review where I took a critical review of the prerequisite for enhancing local content within the same. Next slide, kindly. Now, based on my finding, I came up with I sought to realize that there are no current definition, no agreed definition of what local content is, but it depends on the objective of each state to achieve with its local content, and different states will accept different description. I'll read a definition for local content, which Kenya adopts in a broader national perspective, and it defines as a net value generated to the nation economy as a result of the discovery, extractives, processes, marketing, and ensuring sale of petroleum goods and services, and employment of local obtained laborers. While in Uganda, they define it differently. I believe I'll be correct. As the equity or a percentage of products made in Uganda, services rendered there, and the use of personnel finding supplies and services by local firms in any operations conducted there. While in Tanzania, they define it as the current legal framework as the value added or created in the economy through deliberate utilization of Tanzanian human and material resource and services in investment with a view of promoting local investment, ownership, and participation. Now, if I went ahead in the next slide, I'll be talking about some of the benefits that local contents have to the host countries. Now, the goal of local content regulation is typically to maximize the advantages from the oil and gas value chain, which represent a substantial change from the previous system where the host state simply received taxes as the result from the result of the oil and gas production. And the usefulness of local content to the host country were employment generation. They foster the expansion of emerging industries. They raise the quality of life in the communities and the training of the local workforce. Now, on the next slide, I focus on government policy implication. That is on the development of the local content. Where in Kenya, the postage has been marked by the creation of laws and policy regulations relating to extraction of petroleum. Now, on the local content policy, it is found in the energy and petroleum policy, and this policy notes the following: the need for development of local content for developing the economy. Secondly, enactment of legislative framework to prioritize the utilization of local goods and services with a mechanism to monitor compliance. And then thirdly, propose further policy mechanism to ensure a retention of the value created from the energy and petroleum sector to stimulate employment, entrepreneurship, diversification, and technology transfer along the value chain. I focus on we have the laws on the local content in Kenya. One, we have the Petroleum Act 2019 and the Local Content Bill, which contain the provision of local content. Then we have the local content bill, which obligates the national and county government to put a mechanism to ensure that operator develop on the same. Then, okay. Then I focus on the PSC, which is a model, on the provision of local content, on the Petroleum Act first schedule, which is a Kenya model. PSC reiterates the act requirement that contractor give preference to engineers, goods and services. And next slide, kindly. Sorry. Yeah, that's for it. Thank you for your time, kindly.
Let's give him another round of applause. He certainly has done some work there with the studies. One of the organizers just walked in and told me we have 5 minutes. I was asking what happened at the start, but it's okay. So we need to add to wrap it now. I will still have a time for at least 1 or 2 or 3 questions for today. I can see there's one there. Only one? I know there are 2 microphones. One's over here and one in there. But as the microphone gets there, I would want to ask one question to Betty. For some time, in almost every local content discussion we had, we saw 3 concentric circles. I think that's what they're called. Where in the middle, we'll have the core technical services. Then as we go out, in the center, we would have core technical services, like well servicing, drilling, seismic acquisition, and such kind of services. And then in the middle, we'll have direct services. Those are services which are directly provided to the oil and gas operations. And then on the outside, we would have the indirect. You certainly have quite a good piece of data on what's developing. But then when we were downstairs, we also could hear, especially the CEO of the Total Energies, talking about that he would like to see the local companies start expanding out of this direct services area into the core technical somewhere there in the middle. Could you specifically tell us what Uganda is doing? Because obviously Uganda is trailblazing in bringing the local companies to that center of the circle, in which case then you will perhaps faster meet the 40% target. And before Betty answers that question, we can take one from the audience so that they are all answered together. Please, introduce yourself.
Thank you, moderator. My name is Charles Nyangi, working with Pura. I'm in charge of local content from Pura. Moderator, you preempted one of my questions, but I will try to put it in a different perspective. I picked interest from the Total guys. As the moderator said, he mentioned that Ugandans, they do participate mostly in unspecialized services, but they're less active. I mean, they are not inactive in the specialized ones. So my experience is sometimes these companies, when the local bid is, particularly in my case, not all companies, but most of them, they will tell you they don't have technical experience. So it's not softly, it's not like the direct thing. They try to put some resistance that the local, they don't have the capacity to participate in the upstream, in the specialized service. So that was the question basically I was supposed to go to that guy. Do they have any mechanism in place to support the local companies to participate in that, in the specialized service? Again, what is your, the government position in that? The second question is on employment perspective. Yes.
You might be shut down before
Okay.
the questions are answered.
The second question, the last one.
No, that was the last one. Thank you very much.
Oh,
Is there another question? Last one here, please. Good.
Thank you very much, moderator, and thanks to our great panelists. I'm Nathaniel Nyok from the Republic of South Sudan, and my question goes to Betty. You know, Betty, your presentation was very impressive, but I want to ask you a question in regards to the recruitment process. Say, for example, for training, capacity building, or even employment in the oil sector. How much consideration and how do you do it in terms of gender representation? Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. I have an appeal for at least one question from a good lady in the room. So let's allow that. Betty, you can hear, you're the one who is getting all the hits.
Thank you. My name is Immaculate Mwende from EPRA, Kenya. And my question goes to Betty again. I am interested in the regulatory frameworks as far as local content is concerned. And how easy or difficult has it been to implement these regulations? Thank you.
Excellent question there. I wish we could all copy from Uganda. Betty, you've been asked all the questions. I actually want to give you the podium to stand here and answer them. Please come.
Okay. But maybe as I come there, I just would like to appreciate you for the questions and for being very attentive. The first question, how do we move from basic to specialist services? The GM of Total noted that Ugandans are still playing at the lower level, but would like to see. There are a number of efforts that we've put in place, and all this is done between us and the IOCs, but also with support from the private sector. The companies, Total, CNOC, ECOP, and the exploration companies, Oranto and Ama Energy, they have done a lot in supporting this. First of all, coming from the legal framework, they are enablers within the law in terms of national participation. These companies are expected to build capacity of Ugandan enterprises as an obligation. So what they do on a quarterly basis is they organize supplier development engagements. These speak about different subjects. For example, they identify the gaps that they come across in the tendering process, and they focus on those. They bring together different trainers to talk about things like health, safety, and environment, having policies as a company. But there's also another very big aspect, which I talked about it briefly, the joint ventures. The Petroleum Authority of Uganda supports the creation of joint ventures. We look at those companies that are coming here, they are experienced, Ugandan companies are not, and then we request them to work together. So that has been one of the mechanisms that has seen us move from the very basic to the higher level of services. The other aspect which is coming on board, but also at the moment is being spearheaded by Stanbic Business Incubator, is actual training, exposure to what is required. That is happening today. The companies are taken through a 3-month training, looking at everything from how their institutions should be organized, how they should write their books, how they can write the bids and the proposals, and how they can organize themselves, including looking at certification, because it's currently one of the major aspects. So we look at bringing this together, global and our local companies working together to appreciate the needs, but also being able to learn on during the supplier development engagements. We are also looking at establishing a fund. We did a benchmark on the Nigerian fund. My brother here talked about it. We did a benchmark, and we are working on it together with Minister of Energy to see that we can unblock some of those challenges that come as a result of financing. So this is very high on our agenda. I think even the second question is on companies don't have technical experience growing over time, what mechanisms are in place. There is a list of ring-fenced services in our laws, in our regulations. 16 services have been ring-fenced to be provided by Ugandan companies. So gradually we are seeing companies, like I've indicated in the slides I presented, the joint ventures where we have geotechnical services. We have Ugandan companies now going for EPCM, engineering, procurement, and construction management. So they are trying to get the very basic way to get them to provide is majorly through working with the experienced companies, and that we are very key. We do review the joint ventures as Petroleum Authority of Uganda as the regulator. We approve them and they go down to start the implementation. And we encourage that the joint ventures are with companies that are providing like services, not to say that you're going in but only to provide the basic, but rather to be able to play at that level and take on in future. So there is a whole range of aspects that we take into consideration, even the national supplier database to project their visibility, the engagements that we normally have, communication, early communication of demand so that they know at a certain point these services will be required. So how do I begin to prepare myself? Because one of the reasons that was deterring the companies from participating was lack of information on what is coming in terms of tendering. So we do get the list of the upcoming procurements. We post them on the PAU websites, on the company websites, so Ugandan companies can be able to participate. It's a gradual process. When you look at what is happening in other countries, it is something that they have to work on, and it takes the effort of the company. So we are there, we are working with them, we are working with private sector, and we believe gradually we should be able to get the companies to participate in that outer space where we have the specialists services like drilling, rigging, and those activities. So in terms of the legal framework and how supportive, I think what this country realized is that regulation can be done two ways. It can be by negotiation or putting rules. So we do both. There are aspects where we sit with the companies and negotiate how can we do this. But we also have a very comprehensive legal framework. The laws, the petroleum upstream and midstream, they have national content requirements. We have regulations for upstream and midstream. We have a set of guidelines as well. So these have been very key. Just imagine the 16 ring-fence services. Everyone in this country, every investor knows who comes here that these 16 services, if you want to deliver on any of them, you must go into a joint venture with a Ugandan company. That is a very big support to local enterprise development. The other aspect is 10% in the evaluation. When you bid as a Ugandan company, right away you know you have a 10% score within the evaluation criteria for any service. There's the technical, there's the financial, but within the technical, 10% is allocated to national participation. So out of 100%, you already have a 10%. That is another enabler. Very key priority for all services to Ugandan companies. If a Ugandan company can't supply by themselves, second level is a joint venture, which is approved by the regulator, Petroleum Authority. Third level, international services, like, for example, we have drilling rigs that have come here. Those services we can't offer as Ugandans. So what we require is what can be subcontracted. You're going to construct a rig from Russia or from Qatar, wherever you're going to construct it from. When you reach Mombasa, at least let the transportation be done by a Ugandan company, because that we can do. So even at that level, we look out for those small services that we can subcontract. So the legal framework has been very supportive. I don't know what we would be talking about today if we didn't have it, because it sets the pace on regulation of national participation. So thank you.
Thank you very, very much for that. Betty, please take your seat. I think we are coming to the end. Did you address the question of gender representation?
Very sorry about that. Very sorry about that. We are very intentional on gender integration in oil and gas. This morning we were in a session just next door, and we're told that globally 39% women are employed in all sectors, only 39%, so all other sectors are struggling. But in oil and gas, it's only 16%, and these are global statistics. So as a country, we are really trying to do our best. The companies that are here, they have very intentional policies that attract women in employment. We are speaking about the African Development Bank project that I talked about, is looking at supporting youth and women empowerment. And one of the aspects they are looking at is how do we get the companies that are female-led or youth-led to get into the oil and gas sector. It's a gradual process. We are not there yet, but there are a number of efforts that are in place. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think let's give a big round of applause to all the speakers. And for those who are trying to learn from Uganda, I think it would be important you have a look at their local content regulations or national content regulations as they are referred to. I think the concept of ring fencing is one that many of the countries in the region might want to have a look at. I think it has had tremendous benefits in that. So you will let me close this session at this point, thanking the two gentlemen and lady for your preparations and the presentations for today. If we didn't have a shortage of time, we would have had them tell us a few more things before they leave, but unfortunately we start where we are right now. So thank you so much, but for the presenters, please don't leave. I'm told there's some presentations to be done to yourselves. So thank you so much to the audience, and asante sana kwa kukuja hapa leo alasiri.
Just a moment. The next session is supposed to begin right away here, so just stay around. We are waiting for the moderator to come and take over the session. Are the presenters here already with us?
The Oil and Gas Moment, brought to you by Petroleum Authority of Uganda, creating lasting value in Uganda's oil journey. The development and commercialization of Uganda's oil and gas resources is being undertaken through 4 flagship projects, which will bring in investment over $15 billion into the economy. The Kingfisher project will produce 40,000 barrels of crude oil per day at peak. The Tilenga project will produce 190,000 barrels of crude oil per day at peak. The 1,443-kilometer East African crude oil pipeline project will transport the produced crude oil to access the international market via the Tanga port in Tanzania. The Uganda refinery project will process up to 60,000 barrels of oil per day to provide petroleum products to the Ugandan market and its immediate neighbors. Additional exploration work is ongoing in the Kanyotaba and Ngasa areas in the Albertine Graben. For more information, visit www.pau.go.ug. Petroleum Authority of Uganda, creating lasting value in Uganda's oil journey. The Oil and Gas Moment, brought to you by Petroleum Authority of Uganda, creating lasting value in Uganda's oil journey. The development and commercialization of Uganda's oil and gas resources is being undertaken through 4 flagship projects, which will bring in investment of $15 billion into the economy. The Kingfisher project will produce 40,000 barrels of crude oil per day at peak. The Tilenga project will produce 190,000 barrels of crude oil per day at peak. The 1,443-kilometer East African crude oil pipeline project will transport the produced crude oil to access the international market via the Tanga port in Tanzania. The Uganda refinery project will process up to 60,000.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to, I presume this must be one of the last sessions of this conference here. My name is Halfani. I'm from Tanzania. And the theme of our discussion here this afternoon will be local content empowering the East African oil and gas sector players. I have on the list 5 panelists, and for the sake of time, I'm going to call all the 5 of them here to the front. I hope they're all in here. Number 1, I've seen her, Loida Kinoko. Would you come forward, please? Thank you very much. Loida, she's going to take us on the road to becoming an independent upstream operator, a case of the Ugandan National Oil Company. Thank you very much. Our next one is Vincent Sayo. Is he around? Please. Yes. Vincent is going to take on the effects of local content policies on sustainable local development in the upstream oil and gas industry with specific reference to Kenya. Our next is Esther Asham. Please. Esther, she's going to talk on the case of EAPCE' as an opportunity for East Africa to widen its revenue base. Please. The next speaker is Engineer Magige from Tanzania. We are missing him. I think he's going to join us later. There is one other here, Mr. Mahuza. Yep. Please come. Mr. Mahuza is going to discuss on managing expectations for better outcomes. Thank you very much. These are 4 of the 5 that were due to speak before us. In that order, I'm going to request one after another to make a very short personal introduction. Just very short, and then after that, I will give each one of you 7 to 8 minutes to take us through the topic that he or she has prepared. Please.
Good afternoon, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. My name is Lloyd Achichoncho. I work with the Uganda National Oil Company as the head of exploration and new ventures. And welcome to this session. I'm glad that you have chosen to be here. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Muhumuza Didas, but it's okay. I work with the Petroleum Authority of Uganda under the legal and corporate affairs aspects. You're most welcome to this session. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Vincent Sayo. I work in the Ministry of Energy and Petroleum, Kenya, as a petroleum technologist.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Esther Acham. I'm an advocate by profession and I specialize in taxation. Thank you.
Thank you to all of you. Let's now welcome to the floor Loida to talk to us on the Ugandan National Oil Company's endeavor to become an independent upstream operator. Have slides?
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. As I indicated, my name is Lloyd Achichoncho. And our topic, as set on the slide, is the road to becoming an independent operator in the upstream. And it's a case for the Uganda National Oil Company Limited. Just in brief, I'll give an introduction of what the Uganda National Oil Company Limited is, just a brief to understand where we're going. We were established by Section 42 of the Upstream Act and registered in 2015 under the Companies Act of 2012 as a limited liability company that is wholly owned by the government of Uganda. Our mandate is to handle the government's commercial interests in the petroleum sector, and among other things, to investigate and propose new upstream, midstream, and downstream ventures locally, but later internationally. We are also mandated to develop in-depth experience and expertise in the oil and gas sector. So that's what makes this topic a national content aspect. We have two shareholders, that is the Minister of Energy with a majority shareholding of 51%, and the Minister of Finance with a shareholding of 49%. And we have two subsidiaries, one which is the Uganda Refinery Holding Company that is responsible for refining petrochemical related businesses, and the National Pipeline Company that is responsible for the pipelines, storage, and downstream ventures. We are an integrated company that operates across the entire petroleum value chain, upstream, midstream, and downstream. In the upstream, UNOC has a mandate to manage the state participation in the Tilenga and the Kingfisher development projects, which are under the operatorship of Total Energies and Sinok Uganda Limited. UNOC is the operator of the new block that is the Kasurubani contract area, and we hold 100% participating interest, and we continue to explore more opportunities for exploration. In the midstream, we hold 15% in the ECOP, and also we will hold 40% in the refinery. We are also managing the Kabalega petrol-based industrial park that will accommodate the second international airport, the crude export pipeline, the export hub, refinery, and other petrochemical industries. In the downstream, we are involved in operating the ginger storage terminal, in the downstream, we have the ginger storage terminal that we are operating, which is a 30 million liter capacity, and will also develop the Kampala storage terminal, which is 320 million liter. In the upstream, as from that side, as I indicated, we have 15% in the Tilenga and Kingfisher, and we have the Kasurubani. In the upstream again, the strategy is to become an independent operator initially locally and later internationally through a planned approach. What we are looking at is to start participating as a non-operator in the non-operated projects, and then moving to acquire licenses like we have in the Kasurubani, and then we'll move on as we partner with other entities, will be able to operate and acquire the technical and financial expertise that we need to manage all the upstream ventures. And the delivery model for the Kasurubani is through strategic venture partnership to enable UNOC to acquire the requisite capacity to transform from a joint operations and explore and develop internationally. Just a screenshot of the prospectivity of the Kasurubani block. It's very highly prospective. We have estimated over 500 million barrels in place. Over 9 prospects have been identified on seismic. The wells that have been drilled, 3 wells that have been drilled, have encountered hydrocarbons. There are surface manifestations, as you can see in the slide, of oil on the surface, and there is more potential expected from the undrilled well and offshore area that is in the lake. As an operator of the contract area, we are required to undertake the day-to-day operations of the license in fulfillment of the work program obligations. And we are committed to undertaking the work program that is vigorous enough and includes, for example, in the first set, we're looking at G&G data and other geochemical studies. We're looking at acquiring seismic to the infill, and also we are required to look for a partner to work with in the delivery of the exploration obligations. That is the first phase. In the second phase, as we progress into the operations of the block, we are looking at getting a joint venture on board, and we continue to undertake exploration and appraisal programs, and these include the G&G and other engineering studies, acquisition of seismic data, and drilling of more exploration wells. Moving to the third phase, we are looking at undertaking or continuing with exploration and appraisal programs, and on a success case, we'll submit a field development to government for approval and expecting the issuance of a production license. And from then, we'll undertake development operations leading to production. In conclusion, UNOC is on the right path to developing the technical and financial capacity to independently operate petroleum operations, and this will be achieved through the following. The conduct of the day-to-day operations will enable us to acquire that capacity, because we'll be able to drill wells, to propose other things related to exploration and appraisal, and also the field development plans. The partnership with entities that possess requisite capacity, financial and technical, that will enable us to acquire technical and technological skills when we are working with them. We are looking at provision of oil field services in partnership with experienced entities, and that will enable transfer of knowledge and technology. We are looking at acquisition of more acreages, both in country and later in the region and internationally. And being able to deliver the work program will enable us to develop the capacity. All these lead to maximization of national content in the petroleum operations and enhancement of the total participating interest of the state. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for attending this session and listening to me. And for further information, kindly visit our booth, that is 61 and 62, to more opportunities that Uganda National Oil Company offers. Thank you, and thank you very much.
Let's put our hands together again for her. Thank you very much for your presentation, leader. We are reserving our questions to the end. I think we'll have time for questions later on. I now would like to call on our next speaker. He's going to give us the Kenyan experience on the effect of local content policies and sustainable local development. I'm sorry.
Good afternoon again, ladies and gentlemen. As we wait for the slides, as I told you, I work for the Ministry of Energy and Petroleum Kenya, as a petroleum technologist. I have not much experience in the industry because I'm now approaching 3 years in the industry. Much of my experience is on the chemical industry, where I've gained from the private sectors in the country. I'm going to talk about the effects of local content policies on sustainable local development by upstream oil and gas companies in Kenya. Next slide. My key areas will be on the effect of employment on local content workforce on sustainable local development, training local workforce on sustainable local development, and domestic sourcing of goods, work services on sustainable local development and technology transfer. I'll be very brief for the interest of time and as planned. There have been a massive surge of multinational companies in the oil and gas sector over the decades in Africa. But despite this, the increased investments in oil and gas industry, the developing countries where these operations are taking place, they are still steeped in poverty. But to promote equitable distribution of natural resources, wealth, there has been a movement towards introducing policies to leverage the resource, promote industrializations, and sustain economic development. On the legal framework in Kenya, we have the Constitution of Kenya 2010, local content policies, Petroleum Act, and we also have draft local content bill of 2018 and draft petroleum local content regulations. From my findings, this is what has been happening in our country by the operators and service companies, because they have been providing employment opportunities to local people for both skills and unskilled labor. On training of local workforce, there has been capacity building for local people in different fields of expertise, scholarship schemes by operators to train local workforce at master's level, and offering of internship to students from local universities. On the sourcing of goods, works, and services, local companies were given first priorities to supply goods. Local companies provided services through partnership with foreign firms, and there has been a priority in the use of locally produced goods. But on technology transfer, minimal technology transfer was observed, as training was the only way companies could transfer technology. Despite the fact that these oil companies have been promoting local content, the implementation of local content has not fully realized the benefits foreseen in the policy and the Petroleum Act 2019. This simply because there is insufficient of local businesses, capacities, and capital in the industry. Number two, there is lack of expertise in the oil and gas industries from the local people. There is also institutional challenges on enforcement of local content, and there is also gaps in the legislation. Therefore, my recommendations are the following. There is need for the policy framework to be clear about the expectations as regards to local employment. And number two, oil companies should expand the provision of internship opportunities as well as learning through cross-posting. The cross-posting of staff within the company, and as well cross-posting of staff within the companies which are in other countries. For example, for companies that are operating in Kenya, like Talo, should have a posting of the local people, not only in the region, but also in the other countries where they are doing operations. This will help to gain skills and experience in the sector. I also need, no, just go back, please. There's also a need for local content bills and regulation to be enhanced into law. As you have seen before, that we still have pending laws on regulations and the bill that has not been enacted into law. And for us to bridge this gap, these laws should be fast-tracked to be enacted into laws, so that we can bridge the gaps that we have. And lastly, oil companies to develop and adopt technology transfer agreements from joint ventures and set aside funding to support for local research and development. As I've said, that the only way these companies are transferring technology is through training. But in the pending laws that are yet to be enacted, we have discussions so that we can highlight the key areas where we can ensure there will be a transfer of technology. On the business opportunities, the direct opportunities available to local enterprises involved those related to drilling and well services, drilling equipment hiring, seismic services, construction, transport, security, cleaning and forwarding services, and finally supply of goods and services. That marks the end of my presentation, and I really thank you.
Thank you, Vincent, for being precise. Let me call our next speaker, Esther. She's going to talk to us on the EAPCE project as an opportunity for local content.
Like I already mentioned, my name is Esther Cham. I'm a lawyer by profession. The topic I'd like to discuss today is the East African crude oil pipeline as an opportunity to widen East Africa's revenue base. I know I deal a lot in taxation, but for today's discussion, I intend to specifically talk about revenue in a large context. And East Africa, contextually, I'm not only talking about the institutional organizations or government. I intend to also, borrow a leaf or two or advise or recommend to the IOCs and other stakeholders herein. It is a known fact that usually oil producing areas are often located at very far distances from the growing petroleum markets. For example, a point in context, Uganda. The barrels of oil Uganda is projected to produce cannot be consumed by Ugandans alone. Even if they were to be consumed by Ugandans alone, the viability of the market or competitiveness to actually get out of it what you have invested would be minimal. That calls for the aspect of having competitive markets, to the fact that the oil producing areas have to be linked to the growing markets, hence the need for transportation vehicles. Transportation vehicles are a number of transportation vehicles. We have ships, we have road, we have railways, and then we have pipelines. And in this context, for a country like Uganda that is landlocked, the pipeline becomes the most viable option, which introduces to us the current East African crude oil pipeline. Be it as it may, when a country is near sea, it can have what we call a single jurisdiction pipeline. But in instances where a pipeline ought to cross through another jurisdiction, for example, a landlocked country like Uganda, if it were to construct a pipeline that it is doing, it would have to cross to Tanzania. That calls for what we call cross-border petroleum pipelines, or what we would say transnational pipelines. The uniqueness of cross-border pipelines is that they are subject to two jurisdictions. Two jurisdictions. From international law, we know for a fact that each jurisdiction is sovereign on its own, and it enjoys the right of autonomy, which means the right to decide on how affairs in that country should be handled. So a pipeline is crossing between Uganda and Tanzania. And yet this same pipeline is being subjected to the right of autonomy of two different jurisdictions. That involves the laws in those jurisdictions, that involves the physical policies in those jurisdictions, that involves the political atmosphere and all the like that are in these jurisdictions. That aspect of it being subject to different jurisdiction creates certain issues, which issues would be corporate in nature. These issues would be technical, would be economical, would be contractual, would be regulatory, and also tax issues therein. That means for any company or any oil project that intends to construct a pipeline to come into any jurisdiction, there is certain planning that must be done to ensure that they achieve from the project the capital that they have indeed injected. It's easier to predict a problem before the problem comes and solve it before it comes, so that you guard yourself. In law, we say when you're entering into contracts, you have to make sure you have safeguards. Like in the morning, we're talking about things like stability clauses, things that safeguard you in the wind of problem, even when the problem is not there. So for a crude oil pipeline like EAPCE', what are these things that EAPCE' should ensure that it has, or any cross-border pipeline should ensure that it has before it commences business? I'll be handling a number of issues. Next slide, please. And this slide will be most of what I'll handle for purposes of time. First, for a pipeline to properly achieve economically what it has intended at the start, it must have a legal and contractual solution that is handled or that is captured at the start. In an aspect, I'm saying it must have a corporate, contractual, and tax structures at the start. Now, for corporate structures, what am I talking about? Corporate structures are, for lack of a better word, I would say the body that the project intends to take. Corporate structures, we can have things like companies, partnerships, joint ventures. Those are corporate structures. For purposes of success of a pipeline, it must take a body of a corporate structures and for a corporate structure, and I intend to adduce 3 viable options in my, research reasoning. One, a pipeline, a cross-border pipeline, can opt to have 2 companies run the pipeline. It can incorporate 2 companies. One company being the company that owns the pipeline, that has the rights over the pipeline ownership. And then the second company being the company that handles the transportation services, which of course will be answerable to the owners. Secondly, we can have what would call the project can have itself incorporated in every jurisdiction where its segment crosses. That means EACOP would come and incorporate itself in Uganda and then also go and incorporate itself in Tanzania. Lastly, which I find the most viable option in such circumstances, is to establish a single corporate entity. That is, for example, in Uganda, in the instance of Uganda, we have a single entity, a single incorporated entity, which is the East African Crude Oil Pipeline Limited, that covers both the covers both the Tanzanian and Ugandan segments of the pipeline. When you're looking at a single incorporation for an entity that covers 2 jurisdictions, it brings in aspects where you can earn revenue. How? For example, it gives you room to do what we call tax planning. How am I saying tax planning? If it's one company for 2, you can decide on the country to have this company incorporated in. It need not be Uganda, it need not be Tanzania, and yet the pipeline is both in Uganda and Tanzania. You can choose what we call a tax haven. For example, you will choose to have EACOP Limited incorporated in Mauritius. How does that benefit you? Before I even drift to that, I'd like to lay light on the fact that incorporation and registration are 2 different aspects. A company can be incorporated in Mauritius, but then register foreign presence both in Uganda and in Tanzania. When we look at taxation, they are handled differently. There are different consequences to these things. Now, EACOP decides to incorporate in Mauritius, and when it incorporates in Mauritius is what we call a tax haven. That means the corporation tax rate in Mauritius is very low. For example, corporation tax in Uganda is charged 30%, and yet in Mauritius, corporation tax is, I think, 2%? 5%? I beg to be corrected. Now, first, you choose a country that has a low taxation rate. Then second, you choose a country that has a double taxation agreement with the jurisdictions where you're carrying out business. A DTA agreement enables or speaks to the fact that you cannot be taxed twice. So you're only paying corporation tax in Mauritius at your 5%, and in Uganda you're simply paying these other taxes of capital gains or dividends, these other that are less. Secondly, other than corporate structures, we need to talk about agreements. The morning speaker was asked about how local content is governed in Uganda, and she said we both have laws and also agreements. The beauty about agreements is both stakeholders get to sit and agree on how to treat these things. That means they can also discussions of how best to get out of it. With agreements, we have intergovernmental agreements, we have host government agreements. These are, I think, common in our minds. I want to introduce a new kind of agreement that is called a commercial transportation agreement. You realize that both in the IGA or in the HGA, things like tariffs are not discussed, and yet the pipeline company can get revenue out of tariffs. We only discuss tax issues in these agreements. Secondly, things like a preemption right to allow the companies that are investing in these pipelines an option to be the first people to purchase the oil that is being transported through the pipeline, so that they can also benefit further. Things like commitment service fee, which we say ship or pay. That means that at the start of a year or financial year or period, the companies that intend to use the pipeline ought to pay a certain commitment fee. That means that even if they end up not using the pipeline, the company has actually achieved some revenue. Things like a portion of a share of oil. Thank you. Things like a share of oil also must be discussed. The pipelines are a backrock of this production of oil. So if you can't give them a share of oil for them to actually realize the capital that they've invested, then you're not being fair. Lastly, I'll talk about the tax issues. My time is, running out. With the tax issues, we are talking about a project that is both handling two jurisdictions, and in tax, international agreements like the ECT, the GATT, the WTO, simply give countries rights to tax. And also, they simply give pipelines rights to pass through each other's countries. Or they simply give countries the perimeter not to impede trade, that they should all facilitate international trade. But when it comes to how then should these things be done, the international conventions are what? Are silent. That is what kicks in national laws. Now, national laws of two different countries that have two different GDPs, they have two different physical policies, are sort of a hard rock to crack. That means that when it comes to taxation, every country has a right to tax whatever crosses through it the way it likes. So at the IGA level, at the international government agreement level, or at the host government level, discussions of permanent establishment must be had. They must agree on whether the pipeline forms a permanent establishment, both in Uganda and in Tanzania. In the country where they agree that the pipeline forms a permanent establishment status. I'm sorry, I don't have time, so I can't elaborate on permanent establishment. On the country where the pipeline forms a permanent establishment, they will then enter into an intergovernmental agreement to agree on how the tax that has been levied off the pipeline from the country where it has formed the permanent establishment will be shared. This calls for transparency, of course, between these jurisdictions. And thank you. I'll stop there. Thank you for the audience.
Thank you, Esther. Thank you for that. Sorry for the time. Now let's talk about managing expectations. We've heard so many projects here, so now let's hear on that video.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll try to be as fast as possible. It's quite a lot of things we've really discussed in the last 3 days. And picking it on from the minister's discussion yesterday, Honorable Ruth Nankabirwa, she was talking about the risk of those people who are scaring investors, that when they back, they also back, if you remember well. Now, this is one of the most interesting bits of any kind of development, and more complicated when it comes to extractives, oil, gas, and mining. The expectations of different stakeholders. This is one area which is very elusive. Managing the same, there are so many ways. It sounds obvious and looks obvious, but it's the most complex. Because the person you had as a friend yesterday, by the following day you are enemies. Because they have got their interests. And if they feel not very well catered for, you'll have problems. And also the other thing is the sort of management strategies you undertake matter a lot. Yeah, because you might think you're doing your best and actually you're not doing the right thing. How to get it right is a collective effort. You work with the stakeholders, and there are so many stakeholders involved in such kind of investments. But I'll straight away run through this next. Like I work with the Petroleum Authority. I've got experience in this kind of work. I worked with the private sector, an oil company. I've also been a civil society activist before, for very many years. Now I'm in government. You can see what sort of person I am. Some people call me, I'm like a hardcore criminal who becomes a policeman. It's very interesting. But so much has been said about Uganda's development. I'm glad I'm talking after my senior colleague here who talked about UNOC, another aspect, but the Petroleum Authority has been talked about so much. But this slide talks about, it has that photo. Very important people. You've got the CEO of Total, you've got the President of Uganda, you've got very high, I think that's the Honorable Minister. That was this at the point of the signing of the FID. It's the signing and subsequent developments. All the things they have talked about, there was the unlocking. You've got that announcement, you've got 2022 marking the commencement of intense infrastructure development, targeting 2025. You've got the opportunity of increased number of stakeholders speaking interest. You've got now the expectations. And the more sure way of getting this off your back is gaining the social license to operate. It's not formal, it's not issued by anybody, but it's dependent on certain factors, how you deal with the issues. Now, therefore, the expectation management becomes the cornerstone of stakeholder engagement. Now, you're talking about even the people standing there have their expectations, you know that? Even the president, he has his expectations. The CEO, my colleague here has her expectations as UNOC. The minister, mentioning then, how about the local communities? Have you thought about them? The local governments, mention it. Now you've got the internal and external. Now it becomes a whole ball game of you being able to overcome many challenges. Before you think of spending sleepless nights over the noise made by civil society, there are expectations of people who are in the system itself, the companies, the contractors, So it is really that kind of important perspective. Next. Why we engage. Now, experiences from the ground. You can look at this. We talk of, as of today, the major projects, I think between Tilenga and Kingfisher, it's 6.5 billion barrels of stock tank oil in place. I'm a social scientist, but I know some technical things, Don't worry. Now, that is the span, okay? You've got the government, oil industry, civil society, communities, investors, academia, media, citizens. They all have something, okay? And these developments, really, you cannot even hide anything. But you're supposed to bring all people into the play. And how you bring them on board is what matters most. Now, the expectations are so high, but also this is because the opportunities and benefits from the sector are immense. This we can't repeat here. But the potential of the sector to cause transformation at regional level is equally great. And the anxiety arising from some experiences of poor management of this subsector elsewhere, I did not want to be specific, but there are places. Uganda has been able to learn from the best and the worst. You've heard that. Now, people, especially civil society, when I was the other side, the people would say, it can't be different from Nigeria. And they will show you the evidence. But should it be like Nigeria? I think Uganda was able to say, no, we shall not be like Nigeria, but there has been benchmarking even in Nigeria. Benchmarking in Norway, Malaysia, I think, Lloyd, so many places in the Middle East and so forth, Angola and so forth, to appreciate, even Libya before it became a different thing, to appreciate what really needs to be done. And local content or national content, mention it, engagement, business drivers, and like those are some of the most strategic ways, distributing benefits, as I will explain. Now, there are many players in the sector also sending out different messages or information. How they say it? You could be there, somebody says it different and says, by the way, for us, we are willing to give you this, but you know, when it comes to that. So here we work together to make sure that the messages are managed together in partnership and collaboration. And that's very, very important for achieving mutually beneficial outcomes. Next, please. Did get this. Now, why we engage, you can see this tells it all. Now, on this side, it explains the great potential, the linkages to agriculture, health, transport, construction, tourism, land use planning, and the like. If you went to the Albertine Graben, I think Lloyda, sorry for using you as an example, she did a lot of work before she became a very high executive. As a geologist, yes, working on food in a very least developed area. Like my colleague said, that you find these resources in what they call backwater locations. You find them hidden there, no infrastructure and the like. Today, if you go to Bulisa, what do you see? It's a different story. Infrastructure is all changed. All tarmac roads, I think 700 kilometers of tarmac. I think, and they use the Petroleum Fund resources, yeah? And then tourism is a different story with enhanced infrastructure. There's the airport, I will not repeat that. But the other side also explains some bits. There are scholarships, there are CSR, that is in Chehoro. Probably you get fuel, and then business contracts. Now, the other side, there are some funny stories that you really need to be mindful of. The oil and gas industry has got certain unique characteristics. It's high risk, capital intensive, and also depends on technical knowledge and information. But the risk is a very important thing. That one explains that photo should be of Macondo if you heard about it in the Gulf of Mexico. That spewing smoke when there was a blowout, yeah, quickly. Now, you also need to be aware of that. You don't plan for it, it comes. That's why you have to deal with that. There's the Stop EACOP campaign. Yes, those guys will not stop. But you can't go to sleep because you're tired, no. Like the minister said, when they back, you do what? You back. So that you can manage a number of things. Next, I think the next ones are very easy. You jumped something. Okay, the social license to operate, I explained. It's not legally binding. It's not an actual document, not granted by anybody, but it depends on 3 core things: acceptance, willingness to tolerate or agree to your investment, approval, supporting and having a favorable regard for the project, and co-ownership. They must feel that they are part and parcel of what? This is when there's self-identification with the project, being advocates and defenders of the project. And this is really what Uganda has tried as much as possible to get it right. What I'm sharing is actually based on experience. And this is a unique kind of research. It's done incrementally. This is something you don't get quickly. There's a statement. The social license to operate arrives on a tortoise. You know how a tortoise moves? Slowly. But it can just run away in a Ferrari. You know a Ferrari? It's an Italian car, eh? The speed is just, eh? So it arrives after a very long time and painstakingly, but losing it is just a flash. And that's the meaning of that statement. So we need to be mindful of it. When you get it, how do you sustain it? Here, getting it right from early stages, fostering respectful engagements. We've had regular engagements continuously and highly consultative and involving capacity enhancement in the oil and gas for the local stakeholders, not this other going to university and the like. Okay? Lloyd will agree with me how much trouble we would give geologists and technical guys to come and explain those things in simple terms, you know, and then information sharing via various platforms. Now, this is one thing I want to say. I've worked with so many technical people who would come to the oil and gas terrain of Uganda, and they would say they have worked in other places, and they say, well, how come that there's too much peace here? They will tell you about South Sudan, they tell you about Niger Delta, they tell you about Chad, and the other area was, I think, Angola. I say there's too much tension in some contexts. But in Uganda, why is it that there's so much peace? It was based on connecting the local council system, local leadership. From LC1, that's village, through parish, that's LC2, 3, that's sub-county, LC4 county, and then LC5 district. Helping them to connect. That when there's a problem, when people wake up to say we don't want this, it's the leaders who really have to come up and say, wait a moment, problem, we need to negotiate. And they would be able to get something from the industry. And also show them the future is what? Bright. Yeah. And then timely identification and mitigation of impacts, ESIA processes, RAP, that's settlement action planning, livelihood improvement, and so forth. Benefits distribution. We've got a highly facilitated national content process, national supplier database, national oil and gas talent register, and deliberate drive for value retention. Better explained this, and the target and the framework of development is gonna be like 40% retention, and then value retention, sectoral linkages, they wanna explain agriculture, health, education, and tourism, and then CSR provisions by the different players. These are very important things. They may sound, they call them additionalities in some contexts. Me, I call them the critical factors. Because this is what is closer to what? To the interests and the hearts of the local communities and the other people. Now, building sustainable relations with stakeholders, I think I've really elaborated this. How you deal with the environment, social, and governance aspects. Examples, you see issues of environment, climate change, water scarcity, waste, pollution, natural resources use. Social, you have labor, supply chain, social impact, community relations, fair work conditions, the governance, stakeholder rights, executive compensation, the diversity, voting rights, and the like. All these things, why I'm raising this, when you have such an investment coming into a context, everybody, it touches on all aspects of life. I've never worked in a sector, I've worked in other sectors like water, and others, but oil and gas is so rounding, it touches on everything. Security, we haven't thought about it. We've got security stakeholders. They have got very serious interests. And those ones come very highly important given the nature of the industry. So this is also, next, the way forward, quickly. Stakeholder engagement and expectation management are critical in acquiring and maintaining the social license to operate, creating shared understanding and co-ownership, and achieving sustainable development. But a good stakeholder engagement strategy can never replace the importance of technical, environment, economic, and social considerations in developing these projects, and all stakeholders must therefore play a role in ensuring that we get mutually beneficial outcomes. One key thing that eludes us, especially in Africa, I learned this in Australia, how they've taken it further. The cost of conflict is a dynamic. We don't need to look at the cost of conflict. You just look at any conflictual situation, how costly it can be. And in these projects, you can manage this by committing 2% of your project value. If it's 2 billion, how much is that? 2% is 200 million? Something like that. You commit it to early stakeholder engagement and dealing with those other aspects of identifying risks, distributing benefits, and engaging. And you'll have seamless achievement because you'll have dealt with what we call the non-technical risk. Non-technical risk is not like engineers who know that this wall you need so much, and like it happens in any way. And you never know where it comes from. Now, if you don't, you'll pay 20% more to remediate the situation because it will have gone bad. You come back to build relations, it is even more expensive. You even have heavy security investment. Nicholas, you know this. Instead of paying adequate, but you end up paying heavy security investment to guard. Example, you know it? Mozambique, Cabo Delgado. They are now cleaning up a mess. They could have spent 2%. Now they're paying more than 20%. These things are real. They may sound out of the way, but when you sit and understand, you're like, wait a moment. These things are different. Now, 70% of the project delays and failures in extractives are due to non-technical risk. 70%. Technical risk is easy. You know what you want. People are trained to do certain things, but this one here, it's not a gamble. They're also professionals like me, by the way.
I can take your contacts and you contact me later. Now, collaboration and partnership for management of expectations is crucial. It's a crucial success factor. And we need to see that these investments we are talking about are really taking care of non-technical risk so that we avoid losing much more value and time going forwards. Thank you so much. And I think this is the last. Next, we see, yeah. I thank you for taking off time to listen to me, but and also for being patient, you know, as the party comes to an end, I can imagine people are planning to leave. Thank you so much, and we keep in touch. All the best.
Let's give our panel a hand up together. Thank you very much. That was quite an inspiring, a very interesting discussions we had from our four panelists this afternoon. Time is running out, but I can take a few questions, possibly around 4 questions. Yes, from here, let me give a mic.
Thank you very much. My name is Dr. Jacob from National Oil Company of South Sudan. I would like to raise my question to the council. We call Maulana Esther. Council Esther, you have talked about the East African crude oil pipeline. But there are some things that make a lot of contradictions in the management of pipeline and the legal framework. If you look at it, you have 2021 Special Provision Act for East African crude oil pipeline. And then you also have the East African tariffs that are there because of the cooperation. You have the 0%, the 10, the 50, the 25, and the 35. Given that the two countries have sovereignties, how would you handle that? What approach is being used in the region, given that this is the 10th East African Petroleum an exhibition conference? So which is which? Are the two countries taking it to be a business bilateral, or are they taking it also from the East African tariff point of view? Are the tariffs provide? My second question is to my brother, who talk about the management of expectation. You know very well that, and you have said as one of the activists who have turned out to be a government person or government employee. The expectation was very high. I always say that the reason as to why Uganda is not producing, maybe it's a God plan. Perhaps a God plan, because perhaps you produce oil today and the oil start rolling. Let me not wish you bad, but perhaps God doesn't want it to flow that way. Maybe it wants Uganda to prepare itself to educate its citizen and to make sure that everybody is on board until a time will come when all Ugandan agree this is a resource they need to extract. I think that the time now the Ugandan will have the oil flowing. I don't even believe in 2025. Maybe God has not planned for that. But let's pray for it that Ugandan are all agreeing to have that resource, because they can turn bad against you if you really don't know how to manage the revenues that are there. So I want to ask you, at the moment we speak today, how ready are Ugandan to have this resource drilled and being produced and being sold, and the government managing the revenues on the common one issue, the common Ugandan that we have today? Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Take the mic there, Nabila. Would you introduce yourself, please, and possibly direct your question to a specific person so that it can help?
Yes, please. My name is Aidan Peter, and I'm from Tanzania. My question is directed to last presenter, and thanks. It was a very detailed presentation and a very informative one. But when it comes to stakeholder engagement and expectation management, there is these two levels, local and then local, meaning national level and in the areas where these companies operate. So how do you check and balance the engagement and the stakeholder expectation, considering that there is too many players in both the end, local and local? Thanks.
Yeah, I'm Reverend Kasirabo Enoch, Uganda. This is related to EAPCE in particular. To me, there is still a very big gap between the company and the peasantry. The peasantry is very important, is a very big stakeholder, particularly in the area of food production and supply. We are going to start construction, but really, have we mobilized the masses to provide the necessary food that we shall need? Nobody will survive without food. There are two types of food. There are those that are very dangerous and those that are very nutritious and very helpful. I would love to see this company financing companies like the Stanbic Bank Incubator, because it is trying to narrow this gap. It is reaching the masses. I want you to invest in that one so that the masses are reached and are mobilized to provide what you need according to your standards. If you don't, people will be taking up walaji instead of milk. Because there may be milk, but milk is not to the standard that is required by the company. So once the worker has finished work in the evening, he will resort to alcohol taking, other than taking pasteurized milk, which have already helped the community to achieve. There are two types of food in this world, which you should not overlook. These are fruits and milk. If you don't finance this sector, they call production or sector of agriculture, to give you the necessary food that you require to feed your workers, we shall depend on imported inorganic food. Yet we can have well-organized organic food. That is my contribution.
Thank you. I appreciate all the presentations. Just a short question for Loida. Are you able to say something about the security arrangement for the pipeline? It is very long. It is across boundaries. Thank you.
The first question was on EAPCE relating to tariffing.
Thank you, Doctor, for that question. Specifically, the EAPCE Act, provides that whatever provisions are in that act only apply to the segment of the act that crosses through Uganda. That means they have left it at liberty for Tanzania to also make provisions for that segment. In the act therein, they make a mention of the intergovernmental agreement and the host government agreement, under which they can reach agreements on the contradictions therein of tariffs. However, for now as it stands, sovereignty is still reigning, which is of course going to create certain hardships in the tariff system. Thank you.
There was also the question of managing expectations. Is Uganda ready for the pipeline?
Yeah, thank you so much. I think Dr. Jacob knows it. I'm very impressed with the depth of analysis. Yeah, one, you said it right, that it's good that Uganda has delayed. Actually, that is one of the things we appreciate, that Uganda has been able to learn from the worst and the best. And it's one of the key things that has caused well-defined legal and regulatory framework based on those experiences and to fix a number of things. But as far as there are certain legalistic things you've raised, I may not answer them. But as far as the
the need to ensure that when this production starts, does not create problems. There's been a lot of things that are undertaken. On the environmental front, you've got to deal with the potential risk of oil spills and the like. There's a whole national response mechanism, which is even decentralized up to the very lowest level. And then the social aspects, social protection and connecting these communities with these developments through national content and local, that somebody raised. But when it comes to revenues, there was the derivation of the Public Finance Management Act in 2015. It has got specific provisions for management of these revenues, including establishment of the Petroleum Fund and even the split of royalties and like. These are things we can discuss until the cows go back home, but it's a lot of detail in terms of managing that. And therefore, one of the key things that has been taken seriously is being highly transparent in terms of information sharing. Uganda joined EITI in 2018, is it? Not so sure. But it's now a member of the EITI, the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, to try and make sure that there's even proper reporting on a number of things. And also being able to involve as many stakeholders as possible. And what we always say is when this information is given to certain level of stakeholders, it has to cascade to the ground, because it's the same approach the activists are using. But as we do this, there are practical things that need to be done to avoid the risk you just said. Otherwise, it can be anything that you can't imagine, but at least this is being mindful of the risks involved in this sort of undertaking. I think I've been able to highlight a number of things. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Mine goes to Reverend about EACOP and the communities, and especially the food provision. UNOC as a 15% shareholder in the EACOP and being a participant in the EACOP Co or the EACOP company has taken a number of measures to ensure that the community relations are right. And going to UNOC directly and the mandate or the requirement by the national content regulations, we hold quarterly supplier workshops, both in Kampala and in the regions. And the intention is to educate the suppliers wherever they are at all levels on the opportunities that are available, but also to develop their capacity to be able to provide these services. We have training of people, and in particular when you go to the food, we have an agricultural program where we train people on the foods that are required for the sector. We train people at the community levels on how to, the standards that are required, on how they collaborate. And we also have a collaboration with the Stanbic Incubator, which is based in Hoima, where they are training the people, they are providing seeds and all sorts of things. So as EACOP and the shareholders, we are committed to developing the capacity of the communities, and it will be our pride to see that Ugandans or Tanzanians at local levels provide the required foods at the right standards. The gentleman who talked about the security arrangements for the EACOP, yes, at the same time as a shareholder in EACOP and as the two governments, that is the Republic of Uganda and the United Republic of Tanzania, there's an intergovernmental security council or the security system that is handling at the two states. But also as the EACOP in Uganda, for example, which I'm familiar with, there is collaboration with the security agencies, both at government level and also at the private level. So the government of Uganda and I believe the government of Tanzania are committed to ensuring that the EACOP is secure enough and to make sure that the people around the developments are also secure. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Loida. Ladies and gentlemen, we are running out of time, and we got pretty good responses right to the questions that were put before them. If you don't mind, let's put our hands together for the four of them. I imagine after here we are proceeding for lunch, and you can have time to interact with our panelists as you go down the stairs. I'm informed that there's some presents for you, so do you line up easier so that give some presents for a job well done.
Brought to you by Petroleum Authority of Uganda, creating lasting value in Uganda's oil journey. The land take for the development of the Tilenga, Kingfisher and the East African crude oil pipeline projects in Uganda is approximately 6,900 acres, with close to 10,000 project affected persons.